Hello,
Hi.
how's it going? I am real quickly getting the YouTube link so that people who want to do their, it still says offline. This seems, let's see, okay. Okay, I just need to copy this.
Front left.
Okay. Great. So we're live on YouTube as well as in this Hangout. So the lucky first 10 users to join will get to join this Hangout and be slightly more real time and be able to talk themselves. Okay, quick reminder. For those of you who are not talking, if you could mute yourself until you are going to say something, that would greatly reduce echo and improve, I think, everyone's experience. And I am just getting some notes ready, and we're going to allow like 2 minutes for people to trickle in before getting started in earnest. Let's see. I will. Okay, so I have the YouTube chat open in another window in case we have. We might not get to 10 people today. It seems like we have a few left. Okay.
अपना लैपटॉप लेके आओ।
Okay. I hope everyone is doing really well. Reminder for those of you who just joined, if you could mute yourself when you're not speaking. Today's agenda, much like last time, I will have a brief message at the start, probably only around 10 to 15 minutes of content. And most of these are just going to be stuff that you've heard from me before in one-on-one office hours, stuff that you've heard people saying in class, whoever that is. Hey, Shahid, can you mute yourself, please? Right, I am going to mute you for you. All right. Shahid, can you please mute yourself?
Hello?
Can you please mute yourself? Because we're getting a lot of echo and feedback, and so everyone else is having trouble hearing. I don't know why I can't mute you from this interface. Can you hear me? Shahid, can you mute yourself, please?
Hello?
Hey, could you please mute yourself, Shahid? Everyone else can hear a lot of echo and feedback from you. Okay, I'm going to try and... Jeez. Let me see if I can...
Shahid and Ravi, please mute your speaker microphone.
I should be able to do that because I'm the admin, but I can't seem to. So he's going to have to do it himself. Otherwise, we're just going to hear him for the rest of this call.
I think he's not hearing you correctly. There seems to be a network problem.
Okay, I'm going to shoot him. I just ejected him from the call. I'm going to shoot him a message on Mattermost so he knows kind of what's up. Is that? I hope I'm getting the right person because I don't have his name anymore. I think okay. All right. So I am going to go ahead and get started then. Thanks everyone for attending group office hours. I hope everyone is having a fruitful first few weeks of startup school. I would like to devote most of this call, as always, to getting questions from all of you about your startups. But I've been noticing a couple trends from one-on-one office hours and from just chats I've been getting. So I wanted to re-emphasize a few points. I apologize in advance for repeating myself. All of these points are common things for me to say, common things for the speakers to say. There are a couple of folks in recent classes and office hours that mentioned them in the lectures as well, but they're so important that I want to say them again and talk about how some of them apply to all of your companies. After that, we'll open the floor for questions. So I have been getting a lot of questions about what to focus on, how to get users, go-to-market strategies. Some people want to focus on stuff like branding, marketing. And I just want to emphasize like a few things. First, like all of you, should aim to launch your companies as soon as possible. If you do not have a product that is live and that is serving real users, then you do not yet know if you're working on the right thing. The biggest single risk for companies at all of your stage is that you spend time building something.
Your voice is breaking up.
Yeah, is that true for everyone? Can no one hear me?
Now it's better, but
I
like
can hear
for
you.
a few.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I can hear you as well.
All right. I'm just going to continue. I'm going to speak slightly more slowly so that just in case the quality is a little bad, hopefully people can still understand. But if you don't hear me well, go ahead and type something in the chat. And if I see a lot of that at once, then I'll definitely stop. But I understand that individual connections might be a little shaky from time to time. So the single biggest risk that all of you face is that you're spending time building the wrong thing. It's really like I've heard a lot of pitches that are very well thought out and a lot of feature lists that are really long, and a lot of people trying to cram a whole bunch of functionality before really releasing this to users. You don't know if your basic approach to the space is correct until you force users to try it. I mean, interviewing potential users is great. Asking them if they would use it is great. But as I'm sure you all have, as some of you have encountered by now, asking someone if they would like to use something is a lot different from having them actually spend the time to use it and actually spend the time to go back to use it again. Similarly, for when you start to charge for your product, getting them to use your product for free is a lot different than getting them to shell out money for your product. So the sooner you get to a stage where you have a live product, which is launched and collecting revenue from people, the better you'll be, and the quicker you'll get to a successful company, and the less time you'll waste building a whole bunch of features that end up not being necessary. So, talking to users is far better than just speculating on your own. Having a private beta is far better than talking to users. Having a public beta that anyone can sign up to is much better than having a private beta, and having a live product that you're actually charging people for and forcing people to pay for. That is the best way at knowing if you're building the right thing. It is very common for founders to be perfectionists. It is very common to be embarrassed by the first version of your product because you have a vision in your head of what the company should be like years from now, and your product hasn't yet achieved that vision. But as Paul Graham told me when I was in Y Combinator, if you're not embarrassed by your product when you launch it, you must, then you've waited too long. Like folks who are really, proud of the first version of their product that they've launched, they should have launched sooner. Okay, looks like someone says the call is fully YouTube. Okay, so where was I? let me hop back to that. And your goal should be 5 really happy users when you launch. Much better than thousands of users that kind of think you're all right, better than nothing. Second most common thing I heard, that dovetails right along with this. Don't be afraid to pivot. In fact, the whole reason why you want to launch soon is so that you can change what you're working on to something more promising as soon as possible. There's a whole range of pivots that are out there. People tell a lot of stories about, hard pivots. Like, for example, Flickr, the photo sharing site, was originally a massively multiplayer online video game. And you could post photos in the video game, and people realized that people were using the photo sharing feature more than the actual game. So they made the whole site a photo sharing site. That's a rather extreme example. A more common example for a pivot is you're still focused on the same general space, but you're using what you learned about your user base to build a slightly different product. And so 2 good examples of that, from my own history at CrowdBooster, recently we joined Y Combinator, and we were a tool for social media managers to get more followers by building this auto follow tool where they could send, newsletter folks in their newsletter of people at their companies links, and it would automatically have their Twitter accounts follow their company Twitter account. It was kind of cool but rather useless. By talking with a lot of these users, we realized that actually just having better analytics with a recommendation engine would serve these users better. Another much more famous example is PayPal. PayPal's original product was beaming money from one PDA to another, so sending people money using PDAs. And over the course of building that product and talking with people who wanted to send each other money online, they realized that PDAs, while futuristic, didn't really have critical mass, and that people would really wanted to just send money to an email address. Someone else in the chat is having a problem. Let me just respond to Sahid right here. Okay, launch soon, don't be afraid to pivot. And the point of pivots is not to necessarily work on a totally different idea. It's to learn something from your initial product and adjust your product to better reflect what your users want. And in order to do that, that inherently means you got to know your users. You got to have a fundamental thesis of who they are, the demographics, like their age, the country they live in, their profession. You want to know why they need to use your tool. And in particular, what are they using instead of your product? Chances are all the products you are building, people are using something, in replacement of it, even if that something is like an offline process or pencil and paper or a text messaging app, to replace Marketplace. There is something that your users are doing to fulfill this basic need of theirs in the absence of your product. And that will really, knowing that will help crystallize, what your users want and where you can find them. And you should spend a lot of time talking to your users, both the current users of, who are already using your product, and so you can get feedback on it, and just, general feedback on your users' day-to-day lives and how they run their business and what other problems they're having. And that will be a source of inspiration as well. So launch soon. Don't be afraid to pivot. Know your users, talk to your users. Those are the common pieces of advice I found myself giving over and over again in one-on-ones. A lot of the same messages are being reiterated in class, but it's so important that I feel like if you're just doing those 4 things correctly, you'll actually be ahead of the curve in terms of startup school students and in terms of companies in their first couple weeks of Y Combinator on it, quite honestly. Cool. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself in the Hangout if you have questions about any of that. And we'll do questions about that specifically, and then we'll do general questions about your startup. So anyone have any questions about what I talked about?
Does doing startup school help in applying for Y Combinator?
Okay, so that was not exactly related to what I just talked about. but I will answer your question anyway, because I'm sure it's a question on everyone's mind, especially because I think the email notification about late Y Combinator applicants just went out. So the answer that sounds flippant, but it's actually really true is, yes, of course it helps in applying for Y Combinator because Startup School makes your company better. And the most important thing for getting into Y Combinator, or honestly, getting any investments or getting into any accelerator, is to have a really impressive company. If you've made a lot of progress in your company, then you will have much more likelihood of doing well in your application and doing well in terms of applying for VC investments. The way you structure your updates, and just like the kind of questions I ask one-on-one office hours are very much like the kind of questions YC partners ask. They're who I learned startups from, for instance. And if you're really crisp at getting answers to those questions, if you do exactly what I said, if you have launched already, if you pivoted to something that your users think is interesting, and most importantly, if you can really succinctly and crisply describe who your users are and why they want your product, what they're using instead of your product, then that's a great YC application. So doing this course will make your startup better. Now, I think what you were really asking is, hey, like, can Mark help me get into Y Combinator? Because I know Mark. And the answer to that question is, I can help a little. I can help review your application, and I can, recommend companies for the batch. Recommendations don't necessarily go very far. I have recommended close friends who I've went to school at Stanford with, and I have a very mixed record. I've gotten several people interviews. A lot of people haven't even gotten interviews. Most people I've recommended have not gotten in. Most people don't get into Y Combinator. It's a very low acceptance rate. But the bottom line is, yes, if I think your company is particularly impressive, I can definitely let the Y Combinator staff know about that. And that it just follows, to what I just said just before. If I find that if I find that you're being really engaged in office hours and you come to me every week and you've just made much more progress with your company and you're very sharp and crisp at describing your user base and your user need, and you've launched a product already, then I can send a message to the YC staff saying, hey, this company that's applying is in my startup school cluster. I think they're impressive founders. They've launched a product. They seem to be smart. Now, will that get you into Y Combinator? No, that will not get you into Y Combinator. At best, it will make sure that the partners spend extra time reading your application so that they don't there's so many applications. Some of them the partners skim, and I see mistakes every batch where the company was just not so great at explaining themselves, and so they overlook a great company. So the most I can guarantee is that they will spend more time than usual reading your application. It still has to be a great application, but getting into YC is a very low acceptance rate, and so I certainly can't guarantee anything, but I can help. I can certainly help. Any other questions? I will check the YouTube chat as well.
Can I ask one question?
Of course.
Yes. My question is related to YC as well.
Okay,
so,
popular topic.
Yes, but just one question. How are the chances of a company which is a clone of another company, as you know that Qiyam is the Airbnb of Pakistan, of getting accepted in YC?
I will say a true clone is not likely to get in, but you are not a clone. A company that is X for Y, where you are just a specific successful company for a very different market, that is not a clone. You should not describe yourself as a clone ever again. It is often the case that companies are just not very well adapted for either product reasons or legal reasons or cultural reasons to a local market. It is good. I mean, it's maybe a slightly easier sort of startup idea. Some people look down on you if you're just cloning a company and expanding it to a new market, but you're serving a real need. And as you've encountered, and as I know because I was talking to you in office hours earlier today, there are all sorts of things Airbnb does which just don't work in Pakistan, and which means you're actually solving hard product problems, like how to do a marketplace in a country where there aren't commonly credit cards used, right? That's a hard problem, and you shouldn't sell yourself short for solving it. And the question there, so saying I'm taking this successful company and adapting it to this market, that's a great source of startup ideas. No investor wants to say I've passed on Baidu because I think being the Google of China is like not a big deal because like look, there's already a Google, right? And like, or saying that the Amazon of India is like not a good enough idea, so I don't want to invest in Flipkart. You know, the one, so that's not a good reason not to invest in a startup. And more to the point, I see companies in the YC do like X successful startup for Y new market all the time. I hope this is public information and I'm allowed to reveal it, but I'm pretty sure they're honest publicly. There's a company in this most recent YC batch that was, or actually 2 YC batches ago, which was basically Stripe for Nigeria. So Stripe is a way, as you all know, is an easy way of collecting your credit cards online for a bunch of countries. Nigeria also has very different payment instruments. So there you go. Oh, I just saw a really good question pop up in chat, which is actually relevant to what I talked about before, but let me close this thought. So definitely X for a new market is a great idea. For your case in specific, your bigger problem is not that you are a clone. It is Airbnb for Pakistan a big enough market, right? Less a problem for YC. They're okay investing in companies which are a little bit smaller at the start, but certainly if you want to ever get venture money, they want to invest in companies which will become big billion-dollar businesses. If there's no clear story for your company to be like hugely successful, to be like a quote-unquote unicorn, most investors including YC, are going to be less interested in you. So the question would be, okay, is Pakistan's travel market enough? Or are there other countries that have similar issues with Pakistan that Airbnb is also not successful in? Can you capture those countries as well? Then that starts to be more interesting. So I would think about it that way. But certainly clones, so you're not a clone. To the extent you're a clone, companies go through YC all the time. Now, finally, Vishal asked a question which is highly relevant to my agenda for today. Amazing. Thank you, Vishal. So how do you avoid bias when talking to users in terms of how you interpret answers? Okay, there are a number of different forms of bias, right? Like there's cultural like bias, there's prejudice you might have, and you have to just be aware of that and cognizant of that in terms of like how you interpret answers. But I think the most relevant form of bias that is kind of unique to interviewing users is, bias in terms of leading, what in courtrooms you call leading the witness, like getting the answer you hope to hear from your users as you're interviewing them. And so what I really like to do is when I'm interviewing my users, to ask them very open and to first start with very open-ended questions, like how do you feel about the product, and see what they say. I also recommend observational studies. If you have the opportunity to literally stand behind your user as they have their phone or laptop out using your product and watch them, observe them using the product and say, I'm going to watch you use the product. Please speak out loud in terms of what your train of thought is, but otherwise I'm just going to sit back and watch you use my product. Or doing the same thing for competitor products, say, hey, I'm going to watch you use my competitor product. And please narrate what you're thinking, but I'm not going to ask you questions. That can be a great way of getting much more unfiltered, input from them. Obviously, then the one, type of question that I recommend asking, which is not an open-ended question, is, don't avoid questions like, hey, don't you think it'd be really cool if you had this feature? Because then they're going to want to be nice and say, yeah, absolutely, that sounds very cool. Instead, ask them questions like, this is the feature. I'm thinking of charging $10 a month extra for this feature. Would you pay $10 a month? That kind of yes/no question where you're not necessarily asking them for money right then and there, but you're asking them, hey, would you spend money? And you'll get realistic responses to that. You're not going to lead the witness through questions like that. So I recommend forming your questions like that, specific questions about would they pay for this, would they use it, and then open-ended questions, which are how do you feel about this, or observational studies, which is I'm going to watch you use this. Cool. Muhammad asks, what is the name of the Airbnb company accepted in YC from Pakistan? That is actually Mohammed's company. I was talking about his company. There's no company in YC that's the Airbnb of Pakistan. There is a company in YC that is the Stripe for Nigeria, though. I do forget their name, but I'm sure you could Google it. It's on TechCrunch.
I had one question regarding design and user base.
Yes.
So when you are asking to your users, what should be the key questions? How should I approach them? For example, should I just say to them, use this product and give me the feedback? What I learned from design thinking and doing observational studies are not very good enough. Sorry, group studies are not doing enough. Consumers don't know themselves what they need.
Yeah, so that's a reason why I think observational studies are so important. Like what you, that's a good point. Another form of really bad question is, hey, what features should I build? If you ask your users to design your product for you, chances are you might get misleading stuff, and you might get stuff that you, worst case scenario, spend a month building, and then it turns out it doesn't make them buy the product anyway. So for that, what I really like to do is, like show examples either by demoing your product or doing stuff like paper prototypes and then asking, hey, would you pay for this? I also recommend, doing observational studies of your competitors. I think that can be very helpful. And then just really focusing your questions on their problems. Like ask them, like if they're a business owner, what's the biggest problem facing your business? And, if you're making marketing tools, hey, tell me about some of your most successful and least successful marketing campaigns last year. And like, what's stopping you from running better marketing campaigns, right? And, just focus much more on getting them to describe the problem that they're facing, like, because they're the expert in their problem. They're the expert in their business. You are the expert on the solution because you're the one who spends all your day thinking about what the different solutions should be, prototyping them, building them. So ask them questions about the problems they're facing, about the work they do, about their day-to-day life, if it's consumer product. And you drive the questions about the answers. Okay, I'm seeing a couple questions from the YouTube chat, so I'm going to hop over to the YouTube chat. Anand asks, how do you get your initial set of users? Do you reach out to friends? Do you put ads? Do you do SEO? I almost feel like kicking this question back to the group because it's been so common in one-on-one, but I'll say just one more time. Definitely don't buy ads for your first set of users. You don't want, unless some of you are actually like, have inherited like billion-dollar fortunes, like you don't want to like spending paid user acquisition before you even know if you have a viable product for your very first users. I would also not do SEO. SEO takes a long time to come to fruition. SEO is very important in the long term because in the long term, SEO is free, it's organic traffic, but it takes months and months of developing good content and iterating to place highly for competitive keywords. So SEO is a very long-term thing. It's not how you get your first 10 users. Reaching out to friends can be a great idea if your friends are target users, right? So if you're building like an app for people to, schedule pickup basketball games and all your friends do pick up basketball, then talking to your users and getting them to use your product first is great. If your product is, command and control software for like big fleets of trucks and none of your friends, manage big fleets of trucks, then obviously like your friends are not supposed to use. It sounds obvious, but the answer is really, you want to first do what I said before, like describe your target user in as much detail as possible. Who are they? What do they do? Where do they spend their time? Where do they hang out? And then, make a list, like actually like go searching like for the list of top companies in your space or like, go, figure out like if your users are posting on Craigslist instead of using your marketplace, go on to Craigslist and like send people some emails, be very friendly, offer to buy them coffee, offer to buy them lunch. Say you're trying to build something that solves their problem, but you're not trying to sell them on anything now. You're just trying to like describe your idea and get their feedback so that they can help shape the design of your product. And by the way, you're in this startup school thing run by Y Combinator, which means you're a totally legit company and they should definitely listen to you. So you do that and you're able to get coffee with almost anyone. I mean, your hit rate still won't be 100%, but if you send a nice message like that saying, hey, you want help design,
Buffer is just me.
No, he just left.
Okay. We'll wait for him to join back again then.
He dropped, I guess. Okay.
Oh. Test 1, 2, 3. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
That's unfortunate that I dropped in the middle of that because I was in the middle of such a lovely rant. Can someone tell me, like, what's the last thing you heard?
It was about
Talk to
buying
your
coffee,
user.
talk to your customers and buy
Yeah,
coffee
lunch
and
with
lunch
them.
for them. Yeah.
Yes, great. So the moral, it sounds like I didn't drop for very long then. So the moral of the story is like how you get your first few users. You identify who they are. You reach out to them. You offer to pay, give them a free meal. You in exchange for having their help, designing a product which solves all their problems. And then after that, you said, oh, and by the way, you mentioned that you're actually working on this full time and you're in Y Combinator Startup School, just as like social proof, or you talked about your background and why you're qualified to work on this startup. And then you get their feedback, and then you get them to sign up for the product, and that's how you get your first 5 users. And the most common case is that they'll say yes to the lunch. You'll ask them if they want to use the product. They'll say yes, of course, I would love to use the product. And then you send them a link, and they maybe click on it. And if they click on it, they definitely don't really use it more than once. And that is how you know that you haven't quite built the right product yet. And then you just have to follow up with them and try and understand what was missing in a non-annoying way. Or you have to change the product slightly and then rinse and repeat with another set of 5 users. And the goal is to get 5 users, just 5, that love your product and keep using it even when you don't tell them to keep using it. That's when you know you've hit upon the right product. So that's how to do it. And then once you've got your first 5 users, then you can, and once you have 5 users who love your product, at the point they actually love your product, chances are they'll start referring your friends. So you'll very slowly start to get a few more organic signups. And second, once they love your product, then you can start having the same discussion, except, now you're getting people to pay for it. And once you get people to pay for it, once people are actually paying you money every month for the product, even if it's just like 5 people, then you now have a unit economic model where it actually makes sense to buy a Facebook ad or a Google AdWords ad, because you're actually getting revenue from that. And now you can actually, you'll still be losing money on AdWords and Facebook ads, but at least you'll be getting some money back, and you can iterate over time to know, like, am I getting more money back from this campaign that I'm spending? So that's the formula. Sounds simple when you say that, when you phrase it like that. The reason why it's not simple is because what I left out is all the pivots you do in trying to get to the point where people love your product. That makes it complicated. But the basic approach is really straightforward. You figure out who your users are, you talk to them, you get 5 of them to sign up, you watch them churn, you iterate on your product until they don't churn and they love your product, then you start paying for you, then you start charging for people for usage, then you start paying for users. That's it, that's the formula. Cool. I am going to check the YouTube live chat again. Sahid asked a question. A company which is already working now, it's going to develop a new product which needs big investment. Can it be a wise way to get investment to research a product? A company which is already working now is going to develop a new product. I see. So you're saying that your product already has, revenue, already has a line of business, but you're doing a new line of business that just requires a lot more upfront investment. I think this is an appropriate, area for WISE to help out in, so long as, like, the new product is like a very early stage product, and so long as, like, this new opportunity is, like, greatly, expanding the size and scope of the business, then I think that's great. I think, you can just explain to YC that you're basically pivoting your company to this new area and apply that way. How do you deal with chores and admin tasks taking a lot of your time? Is that something every founder just has to deal with? Yes. The role of CEO in particular, so much, I used to joke with my last couple of CEOs that like half the job of CEO is like being a janitor or being like an office admin, right? Like, especially in the early days, like, where it's ultimately the captain that has to be the most involved, like with the product. And so you can't, sometimes, especially when you're the CEO and you're the business co-founder and like you have a couple of technical co-founders who are trying to like, really hustle with like, building the product, like you have to give them as much space as possible. You have to support them. You have to be their shield so they're not distracted by random nonsense. And you just have to, just do it. And there's no other way around it. Obviously, once you start getting to scale, once you have a lot of investment and, you're starting to become a big company, then you can actually like hire people to start taking care of your admin tasks, starting with an office manager, then maybe an admin for yourself. But in the early days, like before your seed round, like no question, like how, like at my last company, the CEO, like, cleaned the office, like ordered people, lunch, helped talk with, helped be a backline customer support agent. When the cleaners bailed on the job, she actually went and cleaned some houses, herself. When there was a problem with, payroll, like we had a bug, like cleaner didn't get paid, that she met up with the cleaner, like withdrew money from her bank account, paid the cleaner, and then got herself reimbursed later. Like the CEO's job is to be like the last line of defense for your company working correctly. And once you've actually scaled up, once you actually have a real company underneath your feet, then you can like start delegating some of those admin tasks. But in the early days, like assuming that you're the CEO and like your CTO is the one shipping code, like the CTO's time is way more valuable than yours, man. So you gotta like, do those admin tasks. I will also say that when it comes to like chores, like, well, hopefully by chores, you don't mean like taking random meetings with people who you don't need to be meeting with. Like make sure you're actually like everything you're spending on is necessary. Okay. We have had over 2,000 bookings and close to 15,000 users per month and over a year in business. Is it time for SEO? Yeah, possibly. So if you have over a year in business, it might very well be time for SEO. The next question to ask are like, what's the query volume for your relevant queries? And how stiff is the competition? Like, are there a bunch of highly optimized sites competing for your same queries? But yeah, if you've been in business for that long, I definitely recommend, starting SEO. It also depends on how many resources you have. Presumably, if you've been around for a year and have 15,000 users a month, you actually have more than one person working for your company. Hopefully, you can spare someone's time part-time to start making some landing pages. Cool. How do you balance between generating money for survival versus building the product? You want to do the bare minimum consulting that you have to in order to literally survive. So is it literally survival? Like you will close up shop if you don't consult? Well, if that's the case, you better consult. But obviously keep it to a minimum so you're still working on building the core product. I will say, amend to that, like consumer companies should never do consulting unless you're literally basically having like a side job in order to keep the business alive, in which case you're basically like working on your startup now just part-time, which is fine if that's what you have to do. B2B companies, it's sometimes, especially like less so for like small SaaS companies, but if you're like if you're targeting large enterprise customers and you're the kind of business model where you expect to sign like 100K deals, $1 million deals with large corporations, it is much more common to do consulting for that style of business because usually there's some small amount of integration work with those contracts in general. So for those kind of like large enterprise businesses, the boundary between product company and consulting company is a little fuzzier. You still want to make sure that like the core of what you're building is like reusable and what the consulting work is really for like customizations and custom integrations. That's great. Like if you come to me in office hours and say, hey, I signed a 100K contract or I got a letter of intent with a big business that could result in like 100K in revenue in a year, but I have to commit like one of my engineers to spend like 2 months like doing custom integrations, that's a great deal. Like you're coming out way ahead on that contract. And it's very common for large companies, even like after you've grown, beyond like, just the big enterprise stage. But if you can get contracts that are that lucrative, then yes, you can fund custom work. So if you're going after big enterprise businesses, yeah, your first couple users, it'll look a lot like consulting. But for SaaS companies, doing a little bit of consulting to stay alive can be good. And for consumer companies, if you're doing consulting, basically you're getting like a side job to keep your startup alive, which again, like, you do whatever you have to do. Like, I had a job for a little while during my very first company because I didn't have any savings and we didn't have any investment. So that's what you need to do sometimes. All right. Let's see. Should we use Google Analytics or Mixpanel? Does not matter. Use whatever you'd like. Mixpanel is kind of nice when you are kind of big and your PMs can produce custom funnels. Google Analytics has like some nicer traffic segmentation, especially if you get a lot of traffic from Google, then like they'll tell you a lot of like what people were searching for when they hit your site. Honestly, it's like it couldn't make less of a difference. Like most companies, when they reach a certain size, are using like both. Okay, so does that make sense? Looks like everyone loves Pradeep's question. So Pradeep, if that doesn't make sense, please definitely, like, you know, let's see. We have been surviving 3 years doing cycles of consulting, folks in product, so we could survive. Great, like, mad respect for you. Maybe you can try and find commonalities behind what you're building for consulting and kind of fold that into your product, but like, otherwise, like, I just admire your hustle. Please also share what is the right time for SEO. Seems to be a very common question. The right time for SEO is when, if you want to ask the question, when is it worth a couple dozen hours a week for someone in my startup to work on getting us a bunch of free users that won't materialize for another 6 to 12 months? If it seems like a good use of time for like someone working for your company to spend like 20 hours a week, like doing stuff which will result in a lot of free users 6 to 12 months from now, then it's a great time for SEO. So what that means is, like, obviously once you reach a certain size where there are a bunch of people, you know, working at your company, or where like you're really certain that you're working on like the right product, but it's expensive to acquire users, but you have great, you know, great early numbers, then all that means it's a great time to work on SEO. Jiraj, actually, let's see. Can you please share any example related to our company Gar as Asan, as you talked about Flickr or PayPal? Zishan, I don't quite understand your question. You're looking for examples of pivots, but pivots related to your company specifically? Every company is different. Dhiraj asked, did you have an agenda other than taking general questions? My agenda was my little sermon that were the first 10 minutes of this call. That's all I got. Beyond that, the floor is, so if people haven't caught on, yeah, the floor is definitely open for questions. In fact, if folks, I think I'm up to date on the YouTube chat questions. So if folks on the Hangout want to unmute themselves and ask a question, these can be general questions. These can be very specific questions to your startup. You know, even questions that seem very specific to your startup are often cross-applicable. I was repeating myself a lot during one-on-one office hours today. So ask away. I see. So Zishan is asking of a construction-related company that has pivoted. I don't know that many construction-related companies, honestly. Like, you know, there was a company in NYC a few years back that did, you know, blueprint management for construction companies on tablets. I don't know if they pivoted. I don't have any examples off the top of my head. That said, it's very common for B2B companies focused on a specific industry to also pivot. Like, that's a very common thing, right? So as an example, one of my friends had a company that was focused on, you know, property management. And they initially, you know, were focusing a lot on like hooking up, like, you know, like managing service providers, like making sure you could maintain like the right list of like cleaners and like, you know, handymen to come make repairs for your property. But it turned out that rent collection and having an easy way for small, so in the US, like, you know, it's more and more common now to actually pay your apartment rent via credit card. Total opposite of Pakistan, where credit cards aren't used at all. But everyone loves credit cards here. I thought I got those airline miles. So large corporate apartment chains have these fancy websites where you can pay your rent via credit card, but like an individual who just owns like a small unit with like a few apartments definitely doesn't have a website to take a credit card. So it turns out that for her, it was a much better product to just build a way to take rent by credit card. That worked out really well for property managers. So that's an example of a pivot for a very specific B2B space. I don't know that many construction companies though. Can you point to or give advice on how to transition from pure play B2B dev consulting to products? Well, the first step, like I said at the top of this call, the cycle should be, starting out by focusing on a specific users. And like I said before, like the specific solution you have is not as important as the specific problem you have. Like ideally, you're trying to build for a certain very specific set of users, solving a very specific set of problems. And then you can come up with a product. So the first thing I do is try and focus your consulting efforts on a very specific type of user. I know not everyone can pick and choose, but ideally, try to do consulting work with similar groups of companies. Like try to focus on doing consulting for like small e-commerce companies, or like, traditional brick and mortar retail businesses that only have a one location, aren't a chain, like companies like that. Like first narrow the kind of users that you're trying to consult for. Beyond that, you just have to try and find patterns and try and get ideas for something that is like a good product. But honestly, so there are a couple good folks on Hacker News that have a lot of good blog posts about managing your business as a consultant. I might be misremembering this, but I think Patio 11 is one of them. And I have not done a lot of consulting work myself, so I'm mostly relying on their wisdom. But one of the common mistakes consultants make is not charging enough. And it's very easy to get a lot of business by competing on price when you're a consultant. But you all are, not just good developers. The fact that you're in startup school means you're entrepreneurial, which means you can understand the product, which means you can communicate well about the business side. You all could be charged, without even knowing what you're all charging for consulting, you all probably could be charging twice as much as you're charging. I'm just going to arbitrarily say that with not a shred of evidence, just because it's so commonly true with consultants. And this seems like obvious advice, but focusing on narrowing the number of hours a week you do consulting by increasing your revenue per hour, so you can devote time to building your product. I mean, that's all it takes, and it's hard. I have not done the consulting while building a product thing. I have done the work at a large company thing at a 9 to 5, and then work at my startup at 5:30 when I get home, all the way until midnight thing. I did that for 8 months for my first company, and that was hard. I was very tired. I did not have much of a social life, but I just had to make time, and that's a tough one. Okay, question from the Hangout. Quick question. We are launching the product in a couple of days. Applause. Great to see you launching in a couple of days. Everyone should aim to launch in a couple of days. And if you're not launching for more than 2 weeks, think about how you might launch in a couple of days. And then we would love to have frequent one-on-one discussions with you. How frequently can I book? Once a week, 1 to 3 or 4 days? Okay. I would start out booking once a week, but feel free to email me any additional questions. I'll try to be more responsive. So I'm trying to balance this, my role here, with having group office hours and also my regular job at Google. I will experiment after I get back from my trip with adding additional office hour slots at times that work well in all of y'all's time zone. But bottom line is, try booking just once per week, but also hang out in the chat around times, that the office hours run. And there were no more open slots today, but the last office hours on Monday, there were actually a couple, open slots open that if you were just hanging out, you could have claimed extra slots. So so that would be my approach. But definitely shoot, if I'm not being responsive, if you can't get enough time with me in one-on-one video chats, ask more questions in these group chats and ask me questions over email. Okay. Evaluating LTV, question from YouTube chat. Evaluating LTV is hard, but what is the user base we should have an LTV of 1 and assume? What is the user base we should have an LTV of $1 and assuming product market fit? I don't actually understand this question. Are you saying, can you have an LTV of $1 and assume product market fit? $1 is low. It doesn't leave you very much room for, a business. That means you have to sign up like, a sixth of the world to reach $1 billion in revenue run rate, which really capture growth. But please rephrase that question if I misunderstood it. Evaluating LTV is hard, but what is the user base we should have LTV of $1? I don't understand your question. Are you saying are you asking what your target LTV should be? Ravi is going live in the next 10 days. That's awesome. I look forward to hearing about how your launch goes in office hours. Pradeep, I would try and rephrase your LTV question one more time because I don't know if I'm correctly understanding it. Any other questions? Either I'm looking at both the Hangout and the YouTube chat as well. What is the user base to LTV value ratio? It should not be a ratio. LTV is a per user thing. So the more valuable your product, the higher LTV should be. The main thing the LTV really serves two functions. One, it helps you estimate the total size of your company, if you assume you captured your whole market. So, which is really only important for knowing, like, for getting an investment, because investors only want to have, like, I see. Maybe this is what you're asking. So if you want to raise like a Series A from a Silicon Valley investor, they're going to want a story about how you reach $1 billion in revenue. So in that sense, what the ratio should be is, the LTV number times the number of possible users that are in your target market should be $1 billion a year. And if it's not, then a Silicon Valley investor will not give you a Series A, because I can go into this at a later date. I've been avoiding fundraising questions because it's not relevant to most of you. You shouldn't be worrying about fundraising yet. But just the way their funds are structured, they want companies that are at least that size. So if you can't make that math work out, then, there are plenty of other ways of growing your company aside from raising venture capital from Silicon Valley VC firms. You can grow organically, you can rely on revenue, but that's an interesting thing to look at. Yep. Everyone should upvote Mohammed's thing on Product Hunt. Okay. Does anyone else? We have 6 minutes left scheduled. Does anyone else have questions? The floor is open. They can be question. It can be a very specific question to your startup if you'd like. Going once. Going twice.
Do you have any question for us, Mark?
Well, I would go back to the same things I started with at the start of this call. So, and with every single one of you, I would ask, have you launched yet? If you haven't launched yet, why not? Like, why can't you launch in the next week? You should be aiming to have like a very small product that you can launch like within the next week. If you have launched, I would ask, are you generating revenue? If not, why not? Like, how, what's your roadmap to actually being able to like generate revenue from your product? There are a couple exceptions. Like, for example, if you're making a social network, it's very well understood that with a social network, not only do you not get money up front, but once you achieve massive distribution and scale with a social network, there's proven models for how you can like make a lot of money. So in that case, focusing purely on, user base is fine. But if you're not in a space that A, traditionally doesn't monetize at the start, and B, that doesn't have a proven, addressable market, then you should be monetizing very early. Second, I would ask, like, who are your users? Describe them to me in as much detail as possible. And three, I would ask, like, describe to me like a few interesting things you've learned about users which surprised you, because that's a sign that you're learning. So I would ask yourself that question. Vishal. Actually, no. Gunjung was first. Is it okay to not raise funds or seek VC money? Sure. It depends on your goals. how big of a company you're trying to build. Can you support yourself on your revenues? I will say that, like, you know, for me, I'm interested in building a big business. And it is hard, not impossible, but hard to take a business from zero to enormously profitable and with significant impact with no outside money. It's possible. I think the big example is GitHub. GitHub did eventually raise a huge round from Andreessen Horowitz, but they were very large before they raised any of the venture money because they were charging from the start. So, you know, it's possible, but, you know, but yeah, it's up to you. Is there a risk with launching too soon or with two features for B2B marketplaces for E2Q products? I will say two things. One, there is zero risk in launching too soon. No such thing. I challenge you to find an example of a company that launched too soon, and then I will explain to you why their mistake was actually something else besides launch too soon. That said, we have to be careful to define launch here. There is a risk in making too big of a PR push too soon. For example, like some people assume whenever they launch, they are going to get featured in TechCrunch and they're going to get their buddy to write them to like get them an introduction to a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. They're going to get a front page write-up. They're going to be on the cover of Forbes. They're going to be like the #1 upvoted post on Product Hunt because all their friends are going to upvote them. Like there can be definitely downsides to having a big blast of PR attention, you know, at your company before your product is really ready, because that kind of like defines you in the public consciousness. So I would caution against like having a big PR push if your product is not solid yet. That said, you should still launch. Like you should still have a website that people can use at minimum. And you should still have like a website if you're a SaaS or consumer. If you're anything aside from like large enterprise company, you should have like a product that people can just log in and sign up for your product online. There's no downside for launching that too soon. And I dare you to come up with an example otherwise. Like what's the worst that happens? The worst that happens is like you launch to a few people, they don't find it interesting enough yet. You realize, hey, this isn't enough. We have to build more features in order for this to be useful. Well, you still learn something, right? Like it's only a minor distraction to like do that. So yeah. I guess you mentioned B2B marketplace specifically. So with B2B marketplaces, I guess there is an example where with HomeJoy, for example, it cost us money to keep cleaners on the platform because we had to pay cleaners some money at the start in order for them to be enticed to stay on the platform because you know they're cleaning for a living, so we had to like have to hold their availability. So in that sense, if you're spending money to try and like keep one side of a B2B marketplace alive, then maybe I'm still reluctant to say that though, because there's even in this B2B scenario, there are manual things you can do to spend your own time instead of money in these early days, and there are ways that you can just like force both sides of the marketplace to work by doing non-scalable things. So I would still challenge the notion that it's at all possible to launch too early. Okay, we launched, but we are an R&D company. That's why it takes a lot of time to optimize our services. Well, if you're an R&D company, if you're working on deep technology, it's still important to validate. Like, suppose you're working on building, I don't know, what's a crazy technology? Like an AI concierge that like understands natural language as well as like a human like assistant, like as well as a human. That's a really deep research problem. Like Google has like several thousand people working on this problem. Maybe one of you is brilliant enough that you could actually solve this problem for Google. It's totally possible. It wouldn't be the first time that's happened. So that's an example of like a really like tough R&D startup. You should still be validating the product there. And the way you should still be you should still be like having prototypes that have a lot of smoke and mirrors and have technology on the scenes, like mock-ups that have human. So in this example, you would have like a concierge that has a human behind the scenes that emulates your AI. So even though you're not testing the technology, because it takes a long time to build the technology, you're still validating that people want the product. You still got to validate that you're building the right product as early as possible, even if you're working on something that has a hard technical problem. I guess there are a couple examples where it's obvious people want the product. Like if you're building a cure for cancer, maybe you don't need to do market research to know that people like will use a cure for cancer. But that's pretty rare. Like most of the deep technology startups I talk to, especially in software, like there's two risks. There's a technical risk. There's whether or not they can actually build it. And then the other risk is do people actually want it, assuming they can build it. You gotta work on mitigating that risk as early as possible. Should we raise seed funds pre-launch or post-launch of the product? It's a stylistic choice. I will say that fundraising is an art. Some companies are very good at it because the founder is just very persuasive and has a knack for the game. Those are the kind of people who you see on TechCrunch raising ridiculous like $5 million, $10 million seed rounds before they've ever launched a product. I can go into how those people do that, but suffice it that is rare. You have to be well connected, you have to have a flair for it. Some of you very well might have that style, but it's tough to teach. I will say that even the worst fundraiser in the world can raise money when you have traction, because investors are trying to seek out companies that have launched and have traction. And if you launch a product and you get a lot of traction, people will overlook a lot of like newbie fundraising mistakes and give you money. But if you are very good at like playing, like if you're the kind of person who is like can sell ice to Eskimos, like if doing sales is really easy for you and just like persuading people that black is white and that up is down is like if you like that stuff, if you like those mind games, then you too might be able to raise a $10 million round without ever having a product. But not it's a stylistic thing. Like that skill set is actually orthogonal to being a good founder. The reason why you see companies like Klinkle and whatnot kind of flame out after raising funds is that being a really good fundraiser is a different skill than putting together a good product and operating a company well. So a lot of the best founders in this group will not be able to raise funding pre-launch. How can we attract people to our marketplace at the time of its first launch? Well, you gotta start with one side before the other. I think starting with supply is great. And marketplaces are all about solving the chicken egg problem by hustling both sides. So doing a lot of manual work to seek out the buyers and seek out the sellers, talk with them, convince them to use the platform. I realize that sounds like an unsatisfying answer, but it's the answer. And sometimes you have dirty tricks to scale this, like scraping Craigslist and posting all their listings on your site. I'm not advising anyone does that. I'm not advising it either. Do what you want. It's your startup. But in the very early stage, get your first few users, you just gotta force the issue through manual work. Okay, I'm gonna say this is the last question because we're 4 minutes over. Usually I wouldn't be this strict about time, but I'm actually have to sleep and then I'm getting up again, and because I'm hosting another office hours exactly 9 hours from now, slightly less than 9 hours from now. So if I want to make sure I get to sleep in time. So the very last question will be from Sahid, clarifying his earlier question. He is doing an R&D company. That is why it takes a lot of time to optimize your services, building kits for life sciences. Can we financially support our R&D with trading business? Yeah, finding a side biz. So I left out part of my answer before. So my answer to the last question about raising pre-launch was too specific to consumer companies that are raising pre-launch. If you are a life sciences company that is working on a deep technical problem that requires perhaps government approval or definitely wet lab tests over the course of years or stuff like that, then yeah, you're going to have to raise money pre-launch. And in that case, remember, the reason why people are looking for traction from consumer internet companies is because fundamentally what investing is about is identifying the companies that are most likely to succeed, putting money on them early enough to have upside, but not so early that the money that there's no sign of success. So the investors are looking for what is a sign that this company is going to be the one to succeed. So for R&D companies, if it's like a life sciences company where you have to raise a bunch of money before your launch, what you need is essentially technical validation. You need some proof of concept, or you need an early milestone, or you need someone on your advisory board who's a famous scientist who has a lot of credibility. You need some evidence that your technology will work. And what that evidence is can be highly specific, per space. I've seen a lot of biotech companies do very rough proof of concepts on a bunch of stuff in the Petri dish long before they ever think about animal or even human trials. They use those studies and like some validation from scientific advisors, like they find a professor from a local college to validate their work. Maybe they publish some of their work in an intermediate way. And that's all evidence for the investor that, hey, like what we have is working. So that way you can actually raise pre-launch. Doing financially supporting your main business by having a side business, that's fine too. I haven't heard of that for life sciences, but if you can do that, great, awesome, sounds good. And that, I would say, definitely sign up for one-on-one office hours. It sounds like your situation is a little bit unique. Would love to talk to you about that. Okay, I think I've gotten most of the questions. If there are more questions, I encourage you to join the next office hours, happening slightly less than 9 hours from now. I wish you all the best with your companies. As a reminder, I have group office hours tomorrow morning, my time, later today, some of your time. After that group office hours, I am traveling. I'm going on a vacation. Should be fun. That means I have canceled office hours for Monday. There are going to be no office hours next week. That said, I will be in email contact for most of the time for this vacation. So definitely send me questions via email. I will, no guarantees, I will try to stick to a 24-hour turnaround time on emails. So if you have any urgent questions, ask me then. Beyond that, look forward to seeing all of you in one-on-one hours or group office hours the week after next, or 9 hours from now, whichever you prefer. Okay, thanks, folks, and I look forward to seeing you all again sometime soon.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good night, Mark. Thank you.
Take care.